The mysterious signal. The cold, dark space was silent, as it had been for millions of years. The stars twinkled faintly in the distance, distant and uncaring, as the deep silence of the universe stretched out. For eons, there had been nothing, no signals, no messages. Earth was gone, reduced to rubble. Its once thriving cities and forests were now a distant memory, swallowed up by the passing of time. But then, out of nowhere, a strange disturbance began to ripple through the void. A small group of alien scientists aboard the ship Villacor were the first to notice it. They had been monitoring space for any unusual activity when one of them, a young alien named Kalo, noticed something on the radar. It was a signal, faint but unmistakable. At first, Kalo thought it was just static or a glitch in their systems, but as he looked closer, something about it didn't feel right. "Captain, you need to see this," Kalo called, his voice steady, but his hand shaking slightly as he adjusted the controls to focus on the strange signal. Captain Viora, the leader of the Villacor, walked over and peered over his shoulder. She was an experienced officer, having spent her life exploring the farthest reaches of the galaxy. She was no stranger to odd signals, but this one was different. "It's coming from Earth," Captain Viora asked, raising an eyebrow. Earth was long thought to have been destroyed. The planet wiped out in a cataclysmic event many, many centuries ago. "Impossible," Kalo muttered. Earth was lost, destroyed. But the signal was undeniable. It was faint, almost a whisper in the emptiness of space, but there it was, emanating from the coordinates where Earth once stood. The message wasn't just noise. It was deliberate, and it repeated itself every few moments. "Run." The voice was human. The words were simple, yet chilling. Kalo's heart skipped a beat as he processed the message. "Run," it repeated over and over again, like a desperate plea. The voice sounded so real, so alive, that it sent a shiver down his spine. Could it be some kind of ancient recording? Or was it something else? Could humanity have left behind something, some remnant of their civilization, hidden away, waiting to speak again after all these years? Captain Viora looked at the display, her mind racing. If the signal was real, it meant one thing. Earth was not as dead as they had all assumed. Something was out there, something that had been waiting for centuries to speak. She knew this was no ordinary message. It wasn't a simple distress signal or a forgotten remnant from the past. This was intentional. "Prepare the crew," she ordered, her voice calm but laced with urgency. "We're going to Earth." Kalo's fingers trembled as he typed commands into the console, setting the coordinates for the ship's course. His mind raced with questions. How could Earth still be alive? And why, after 100,000 years, was a human voice suddenly warning them to run? As the Villacor shifted into warp speed, leaving behind the safety of their quiet corner of the galaxy, the crew members couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something they didn't fully understand. The voice was still echoing in their ears, the message repeating itself, each word like a hammer pounding on their nerves. Run. The aliens on board knew one thing for sure. There was something terribly important about Earth's last message. But what could it mean? And what kind of danger had humanity been warning them about? The ship surged forward, its sleek hull cutting through the vastness of space. The crew sat in tense silence, all eyes on the viewports as Earth's coordinates grew closer. The ship's engines hummed with energy, and the anticipation grew thick in the air. What awaited them on that once vibrant planet? What had happened to Earth that could leave behind such a powerful, desperate plea? As the planet Earth came into view, the crew of the Villacor saw a barren world. From a distance, it looked like a dead rock, its surface scorched and broken. No green, no blue oceans, just the remnants of what once was. Yet the message from Earth still rang out, clear and unsettling. Run. Something didn't make sense. Why was the message still playing after all these years? And why now? Captain Viora stood still, her eyes fixed on the planet below. "This isn't just a signal," she whispered, almost to herself. "This is a warning." She turned to Kalo, her expression grim. "Set a course for the surface. I want to know who or what left that message." The crew members exchanged uneasy glances as the ship's engines powered down, bringing them closer to the shattered world below. The crew knew they were about to uncover a secret that had been buried for 100,000 years. And though they were experts in space exploration, this was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The journey to Earth had just begun, but the questions that lingered in their minds were far greater than any answers they could hope to find. Who had left the warning? What had happened to Earth? And most terrifying of all, why was the message still calling them to run after all these years? The Villacor descended toward Earth's desolate surface, the eerie silence of space replaced by the hum of the ship's engines and the chilling echo of humanity's last warning. The mystery of Earth was about to unfold. The Villacor descended further into Earth's atmosphere, cutting through the silent, cloudless skies. The ship's engines hummed as it adjusted its trajectory, its sleek body gliding through the emptiness. Below them, the planet's surface lay broken and barren. There was no sign of life. No forests, no cities, no vast oceans. Just an endless wasteland of craters and cracked earth. For 100,000 years, this world had been forgotten, a dead planet in the vast expanse of space. And yet, the message persisted. A human voice, desperate and clear. "Run." The crew aboard the Villacor was unnerved. There was no logical explanation for what they had just heard. No one had expected Earth to be anything but a lifeless husk, its history lost to time. Yet, somehow, a piece of humanity's past had managed to survive, trapped in the vacuum of space. Captain Viora stood at the front of the ship, her hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes were fixed on the view of the ruined planet below, her face a mask of calm, though her mind was racing. What could have done this? She murmured under her breath. Her words were barely audible, but they echoed in the tense atmosphere of the command room. Kalo, the young alien who had first detected the signal, stood nearby, watching with a mixture of awe and fear. His once confident hands now fumbled with the ship's controls, his mind consumed with the same question. What could leave behind a message so desperate after all these years? And why was it calling them to run? "Captain, we are nearing the surface," Kalo reported, his voice wavering. "I'm detecting some structures." "No, wait. They're not structures. It's something else." The captain raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, Kalo?" "It's like the land itself is broken. It's shifting. There are signs of something massive moving beneath the surface," Kalo explained, his eyes scanning the readings on his console. "But it's not natural. This planet, it feels wrong." A sense of unease swept through the crew. There were no known species in the galaxy that could alter the very land of a planet, at least not without immense technology. What could have done this to Earth? The questions piled up, but no answers could be found. Yet, "Prepare for landing," Captain Viora ordered, her voice firm, but not without tension. "We need to see it for ourselves." The Villacor slowly descended toward a large flat area, avoiding the jagged remnants of broken mountain ranges and the ruins that dotted the landscape. As they neared the surface, the airlock doors hissed open, revealing a barren world of gray and dust. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the ramp descended, the crew ready to step into a world that had been silent for centuries. The dust around them swirled as they made their way down the ramp, and the air felt thick, as though it had not been disturbed for millennia. The landscape stretched out before them, a vast, empty wasteland. The sun, though dimmed by the planet's broken atmosphere, cast a haunting glow over the shattered remnants of Earth. There was nothing here except emptiness and decay. Captain Viora led the group, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The team followed closely behind her, scanning the area with their advanced equipment, looking for signs of life or death. "Nothing alive," one of the crew members, Tora, reported from the back. No plants, no animals, just ruins. The crew continued to walk, their boots crunching against the brittle ground. They passed strange, broken structures, as though the planet's surface itself had been torn apart by some catastrophic force. They looked like old cities, but they were barely recognizable. Nothing like the grand civilizations they had studied in their archives. Everything was destroyed, but it felt purposeful. "We're getting closer," Kalo said, his voice tense as he checked his device. "There's something ahead. Something massive." As they moved toward the source of the strange readings, the ground seemed to hum beneath their feet, as if the planet itself was alive in some twisted way. The temperature dropped abruptly, and the air grew thick with an oppressive feeling, as though they were being washed. Suddenly, a massive crater appeared in the distance, its edge jagged and broken. It was the size of a city, and in the center of it lay a strange structure, partly buried beneath the rubble, but still standing tall. The crew's instruments buzzed with activity as they approached. Whatever it was unlike anything they had ever seen before. "What is that?" Tor asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was pointing toward the massive structure, her eyes wide with disbelief. The structure was a towering, twisted amalgamation of metal and stone, covered in strange symbols. It seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural glow, as if it were alive, as though it had been waiting for them. The team cautiously moved forward, but the closer they got, the stronger the feeling of unease became. "That doesn't belong here," Captain Viora said, her voice low. "It looks like something alien." Kalo checked his readings again, his face pale. "It's not just alien, Captain. It's human." The revelation sent shockwaves through the crew. How could a human structure be here? Earth was supposed to be destroyed, obliterated in the great cataclysm. Yet here they were, standing before what seemed to be an ancient, human-made monument. But why was it hidden here, buried beneath the surface? As they closed in on the structure, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the air, shaking the ground beneath them. The rumble grew louder, and the crew's equipment began to malfunction. Something was stirring deep below the surface. "Get back to the ship," Captain Viora shouted. "Now." But it was too late. The ground beneath them cracked open, and a massive, dark shape rose from the earth. It was too quick, too massive for them to escape. The crew stared in horror as the once quiet wasteland erupted in front of them. And then they heard it, the voice again, faint but growing louder. "Run." The warning was clear. But was it too late? The ground trembled beneath the crew's feet as they scrambled back toward the ship. The air crackled with tension, every nerve on edge as the massive shape continued to rise from the depths of the planet. The crew's minds raced. What was that? And why did it feel so wrong? Captain Viora's pulse quickened as she scanned the area. Her heart pounded in her chest, and yet she remained calm on the surface, barking orders to her team. "Move. Get to the ship, now." But the crew was frozen, caught in a mix of fear and awe. The massive, dark form before them seemed to be alive, its surface shifting, groaning as though it were waking up after a long slumber. The structure's eerie glow intensified, casting long, haunting shadows across the shattered landscape. Kalo, who had been closest to the phenomenon, was the first to break the trance. "Captain, the signal. It's getting stronger." His voice trembled, but his eyes never left the rising shape. This thing, it's connected to the message. The warning. The realization hit them all at once. This wasn't just some abandoned relic of Earth's past. No, this was something far more dangerous. The structure that had been hidden for centuries was awakening, and with it, the cryptic warning. Captain Viora quickly scanned the horizon. Their ship, the Villacor, was still a few hundred meters away, its hull glinting under the dim sun. But that felt like miles now. The rumbling of the earth beneath them seemed to echo in their bones, as though the very planet was warning them of impending doom. "Move," she barked again, her tone urgent. But before any of them could take another step, a screeching, unnatural sound tore through the air. It wasn't from a creature. Whatever it was, it came from beneath the surface. Then the ground split wide open. A wave of heat surged from the crack, followed by the sound of something massive pushing its way upward, breaking through centuries of Earth's crust. The Earth shook so violently that several crew members fell to their knees, unable to maintain balance. And the ship, far behind, seemed so distant now, as if the planet itself was pulling them into its depths. "Everyone, stay close," Captain Viora shouted over the noise. "Keep moving. We can't stay here." But there was no time for escape. The ground split open further, revealing more of the monstrous shape, something that could only be described as ancient and unnatural. Its black, metallic form glistened in the pale sunlight, revealing jagged, broken edges. It looked like something that had once been alive, something that had been left to decay for eons. But now it was awakening, as though it was hungry for something, perhaps revenge. "Is that a ship?" Tora whispered, her voice hoarse from the dry, thin air. She was staring at the massive object, her eyes wide with disbelief. Kalo's eyes narrowed as he analyzed the data on his console. "It's not a ship. At least, not in the way we understand it. This thing is ancient. Its architecture, its structure, it's all human." Captain Viora's mind raced. How could that be possible? How could a human-made structure have survived 100,000 years in such a condition? And why was it calling them here? Why had the message, "Run," still managed to survive all these years, only to bring them into the heart of the planet's destruction? Then, without warning, the massive object, whatever it was, unleashed a deafening roar. It wasn't a sound that came from any creature they had ever encountered. It was a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of time, as if the planet was crying out in agony. The ground beneath them cracked again, this time with violent force. Captain Viora and her crew were thrown off balance, tumbling into the dirt. They struggled to get up, their bodies aching, their hearts racing as the roar of the awakening entity filled the air. Something was wrong. The creature, or whatever it was growing stronger. It seemed to be feeding on the planet itself, its body shifting and twisting as it rose from the depths, its form becoming clearer with each passing second. What they were witnessing was something beyond their comprehension. It wasn't just an ancient artifact. It was alive, and it was angry. Kalo's voice cracked as he looked at the captain. "Captain, we need to leave, now. This is not just some relic. This thing is awakening." Viora turned to look at him, her mind already making the calculations. There was no time to hesitate. This was not a situation they could study from a distance. They had to leave. They had to survive. "We've got no choice," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "Get to the ship. Now." The crew staggered to their feet, their limbs heavy with exhaustion as they made their way back to the Villacor. But the path to safety was not going to be easy. The creature, the entity, was no longer dormant. It was alive, and it was angry. The very ground beneath them shook with each movement it made, and they could feel the air growing thick with danger. But as the crew made their way toward the ship, something terrifying happened. A voice echoed across the barren land. "Run." The same human voice, faint but unmistakable, reverberated through the air. Only this time, it wasn't just a warning. It was a command to escape, to flee before it was too late. The same voice that had called to them from the depths of space was now calling them to survive. But would it be enough? Could they outrun the awakening nightmare? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain: whatever had destroyed Earth was not finished. And now, it was coming for them. The Villacor hummed with tension as the crew rushed aboard. The ship's engines sputtered to life, and the command bridge vibrated beneath their feet. Captain Viora slammed her fist against the console, her eyes wide with urgency. The message to run still echoed in her mind, its weight pressing down on her like a stone. But there was no time to ponder the meaning. "Get us in the air, now," she ordered. The ship's engines roared to life, but as the Villacor started to lift off, a deafening crack split the air. It felt as though the entire planet was shaking, sending a violent ripple through the hull. The crew staggered as the ship rocked, the ground below cracking wide open like an old wound. "What the hell was that?" Kello shouted, his hands gripping his console as if it were the only thing holding him to reality. His wide eyes reflected the chaos unfolding around them. Captain Viora clenched her teeth, keeping her focus. "It's the creature. It's moving. It's chasing us." Her words hit like a punch. The air seemed to grow colder as the Villacor climbed higher. The massive structure they'd seen moments ago was no longer dormant. It had begun to move, its enormous form rising from the planet's core, twisting and writhing as it tore its way to the surface. The sound of grinding metal filled the air, growing louder with every passing second. The ship's sensors flickered to life, feeding Captain Viora a stream of data. What she saw made her blood run cold. "There's no way we can outrun this thing," Kello exclaimed, his face pale as he analyzed the information. It's faster than we thought." "Then we fight," Captain Viora said through clenched teeth. She never thought she would have to face something like this, not in a million years. An ancient, angry creature awakened by their presence, and it was coming for them. She gripped the control lever harder. "Set a course for the atmosphere. We need to break free before it's too late." The ship's engines roared in response as they shot forward, streaking toward the stars. But as the Villacor reached the edge of the atmosphere, another ear-splitting crack rang out. Something was following them. The creature, still deep underground, wasn't content with just sitting idle. The ground ruptured again, sending a massive shockwave that nearly knocked the ship out of its flight path. The ship's shields flickered as the force hit, warning alarms blaring. Captain Viora cursed under her breath, fighting to keep the ship steady. She could feel it now, a presence so enormous, so powerful, it felt like the planet itself was trying to pull them back down. "Brace yourselves," Captain Viora shouted as the Villacor fought its way into space. The sound of metal groaning echoed through the ship as the alien creature, furious and relentless, tore through the planet's crust with unnatural speed. It was as if the Earth itself had become an extension of its body. And now it was hunting them. Kello's eyes darted across the console, fingers flying over the buttons as he tried to plot their escape. But every time they pushed further into space, the creature responded with a new attack. It wasn't giving up, and it wasn't afraid. "We're not going to make it," Kello muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, we will make it," Captain Viora replied, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We just need to get one chance. That's all we need." But the ship wasn't moving fast enough. The Villacor was powerful, but this thing, this ancient, furious monster, it wasn't something they had prepared for. It was beyond anything they could have ever imagined. Suddenly, the ship jolted violently, throwing everyone against their harnesses. An explosion ripped through the side of the vessel. The lights flickered, plunging the bridge into darkness. Crew members scrambled, trying to stabilize their positions as the rumbling continued. The emergency lights came on, casting a red glow over everything. The ship's hull groaned as it fought to stay intact. "Captain," the outer hulls breached. One of the engineers yelled over the comms, his voice strained. "We can't hold much longer." "We're not giving up," Captain Viora shouted back. "Prepare the weapons. If it's coming for us, we'll make it regret that decision." But even as they prepared to face their fate, another voice echoed through the ship's comms. It was the same voice they had heard before, the same human voice, low and terrified. "Run. Run now. It is too late." The voice was unmistakable, sending chills down Captain Viora's spine. The warning wasn't just from Earth. It was a message, a final plea to those who might still be alive. But who could have sent it? Who could have possibly survived this long? Who's transmitting this? Kalo yelled, his eyes scanning the systems in a desperate attempt to trace the signal. But the source couldn't be pinpointed. It was as if the message was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. We can't outrun it, but we can try to survive, Captain Viora muttered under her breath, tightening her grip on the console. Prepare the escape pods. Everyone, get to safety. This isn't over yet. The crew scrambled to their stations, but as they did, they couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. The creature was still there, and it was still coming. The Velocor shook violently, as if the very air around them was alive and angry. For the first time since the mission began, Captain Viora wasn't sure if they would make it. All they had now was hope. And hope, as they all knew, was a fragile thing. The Velocor was drifting now, barely staying afloat. The massive ship groaned under the strain, every piece of its structure holding together by sheer willpower. Captain Viora's eyes flicked over the damage reports as she sat motionless in her seat. There was no denying it. The creature was closing in fast. They didn't have much time left. "Are we ready?" she asked quietly, her voice hard. Her usual confidence had faded, replaced by the grim reality of their situation. Kalo, now with a bloodied forehead from the earlier impact, gritted his teeth. "We've done everything we can, Captain. But if it gets close enough, we won't have a chance." She didn't need to hear that. She knew. The Velocor's engines were damaged beyond repair, and their weapons were practically useless now. The ship could barely keep its course, let alone mount any serious resistance. They were sitting ducks in the vastness of space. But there was one last card they hadn't played yet. "Prepare to engage the secondary weapon," Viora ordered with a steely edge to her voice. "It's our only shot." The secondary weapon was a last resort measure, a powerful one-time use weapon designed for situations like this, when there was no escape and no way out. It had been kept as a secret weapon for years, never meant to be used unless the crew's survival depended on it. But this was no ordinary threat. This was the creature that had destroyed their home, the one that had been silent for eons. Until now. Kalo nodded, moving swiftly to his station. His hands flew over the controls as he activated the weapon systems. "Charging." "But Captain, once we fire, we'll be defenseless. The weapon's power will drain everything we have." "We're already defenseless," Vera replied, her eyes locked onto the dark expanse ahead of them, where the creature's shadow loomed like an unstoppable storm. "We don't have a choice. Fire when ready." For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the dying engines and the sound of every heartbeat on the bridge. The crew was silent, knowing what this meant. They had one chance, just one shot. Suddenly, the ship shuddered again, this time much worse than before. The creature was getting closer. Captain Viora's grip tightened on her armrest, and her knuckles turned white. She could feel it in the air, a sense of impending doom. "Ready, Captain." Kalo's voice was thick with tension, barely audible over the ship's alarms. "We're set." Viora took a deep breath. "Fire." With a deafening roar, the secondary weapon discharged. The sound seemed to travel through the very bones of the Velocor, vibrating the ship to its core. A brilliant flash of energy exploded from the front of the ship, tearing through the darkness of space. It was a single, focused beam, designed to disrupt anything in its path. For a split second, the bridge was bathed in the intense light, blinding everyone aboard. The sheer power of the weapon sent waves of heat through the hull, and the sound of the weapon's discharge echoed in their ears long after it had fired. As the light faded, the crew stared at the monitors in stunned silence. The creature, which had been so close just moments ago, was now halted. The beam had connected, striking it directly. But something wasn't right. The creature had not been destroyed. It had been wounded, yes, but it was still moving. Still alive. "No, no way," Kalo exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's still coming." Captain Viora's heart sank. They had been hoping that the weapon would be enough to disable it. at least long enough to escape. But it wasn't. The creature had withstood the full force of their last-ditch effort and was now charging toward them with more fury than before. Braced for impact, Viora shouted, "It's coming." The ship jolted again as another violent shake threw the crew to the floor. The walls of the bridge creaked as the creature's massive form collided with the Villacor. There was no warning, no chance to react. The creature's crushing force was like nothing the crew had ever felt. The hull buckled under the immense pressure. Sparks flew from the console as alarms blared once more. "All hands, prepare for evacuation," Captain Viora ordered, her voice full of urgency. She knew they couldn't outrun it. Not anymore. The Villacor was broken, and the creature's relentless pursuit had turned their ship into nothing more than a target. The ship's shields flickered and failed under the strain. The massive weight of the creature was pushing them deeper into the void of space, closer to the planet they had tried so hard to escape. Every second felt like an eternity. In the midst of the chaos, the crew scrambled to follow orders. The escape pods were their only hope now. "Captain, we need to get to the pods. Now," Kalo yelled, grabbing Viora by the arm as the ship shook violently. "No," she whispered, her face set with a mix of fear and determination. "We fight until the very end." But it was clear that their fight was over. The Villacor's systems were failing. The escape pods were their only chance. Kalo was already heading toward the pod bay, pulling her with him. As they reached the final escape pod, Captain Viora looked back at the bridge, her home for the past few years. It was falling apart, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the creature finished what it had started. "Get in, Captain," Kalo urged. But before she could respond, the last thing she saw was the creature's massive shadow, swallowing up the remaining light from the Villacor. They were no longer just running for their lives. They were running for the future. The escape pod's thrusters roared to life as it shot away from the crumbling Villacor, leaving the once proud ship behind. The small vessel was a stark contrast to the monstrous creature chasing them, yet it was all they had left. Captain Viora gripped the controls with white-knuckled hands, her eyes darting between the monitors, tracking the fading readings of their doomed ship. "Status?" she asked, her voice steady, but tinged with urgency. Kalo was working furiously at the nearby console, sweat dripping down his forehead. "We're moving, but not fast enough. The creature's still following. It's too fast." Viora's eyes narrowed. She had expected this, but hearing it aloud made the reality even harsher. They had no time. They were too close to the creature's grasp. Her mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, any plan, but there was nothing left. Their resources were drained, and every escape pod they had was scattered across space, too far to reach in time. They had one shot, and it wasn't looking good. The creature was relentless, and the communication channels were silent, except for a single eerie message they had received moments before the escape pod launched. "Run." The words echoed in Viora's mind, a reminder of how much they were up against. Whoever had sent that message, whoever had foreseen this nightmare, had tried to warn them, but it was too late now. They were alone. "Viora, we need to talk about our options," Kalo said, his voice strained. "We can't outrun it. We have nothing left to fight it with." She turned to face him, her face set in grim determination. "We don't need to outrun it. We need to slow it down. If we can buy enough time, maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to signal for help. But only if we're smart." Kalo's brow furrowed. "What are you thinking?" Viora took a deep breath. "We'll use the last of the pod's power to jump to a different sector, then send a distress signal on every frequency we have left. The creature's fast, but it might not be able to keep up if we move far enough." He hesitated. "And if it can?" "We'll fight," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "We fight until the end." Kalo nodded, as if accepting the grim truth. They both knew that escape was unlikely. But there was always the sliver of hope, the hope that someone, somewhere, would hear their message. The hope that humanity had not been completely erased. The pod jolted violently as the creature's presence grew stronger. It was closing in. "Captain," Kelo shouted, pointing toward the rear of the pod. The creature's shape loomed on the monitors, growing larger by the second. Its dark, chitinous form was a shadow that seemed to stretch across the entire viewport. In that moment, Viora felt the weight of her responsibility. She was humanity's last chance. The creature had already destroyed their civilization, but it hadn't killed the spirit of their people, not yet. "Initiate jump sequence," she commanded, her voice steady, even though her heart raced. Kalo worked quickly, inputting the coordinates. The escape pod hummed as it began to charge its engines for the jump. Each second felt like an eternity. Outside the pod, the creature drew closer, its massive form nearly within striking distance. Every instinct told her to turn and fight, but she knew it was futile. They were too weak, too small to stop it. "Jump in 3, 2, 1, Kalo whispered, as though hoping against hope that the numbers would make a difference. The pod shuddered as its engines flared to life. A flash of light, blinding and powerful, engulfed them. They were hurtling through space, leaping through a rift in the fabric of reality itself. For one fleeting moment, Viora's thoughts were consumed by the idea of what awaited them on the other side. What would they find? Would they escape the creature's fury, or would it be waiting for them, ready to finish what it had started? The flash of light slowly faded, and the ship settled into its new trajectory. The jump had worked. They had made it. They were far away from the creature, at least for now. Viora's heart beat faster. The creature had been thrown off course, but it wouldn't stop. It would track them again. The distance between them was now significant, but it wasn't a permanent solution. They had a small window, just enough time to send their distress signal. Kalo immediately began sending out the message on every frequency. A quiet hope burned in his eyes as he worked, but Viora couldn't bring herself to share it. She had no idea who would be listening, or if anyone would be. The galaxy was vast, and they were insignificant in comparison. "We've sent out the signal," Kalo said, looking up from the console. His expression was one of both relief and anxiety. "Now, we wait." Viora nodded. She knew better than to let hope cloud her judgment. "And now we prepare. Whatever happens next, we'll be ready." But inside, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that time was slipping away. The creature might have been fooled, but it wouldn't be for long. Their time was running out. And in the silence of deep space, only one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, they would have to fight. The darkness of space stretched on, silent and endless. Inside the small escape pod, the only sounds were the soft hum of the engines and the faint beeping of Kalo's console as he checked the incoming distress signals. They had been waiting for what felt like an eternity, and yet there was no response. No sign of help, just the quiet, oppressive silence that seemed to engulf them. Viora's mind raced. The distance they had gained from the creature was quickly diminishing. Time was no longer their ally. It was their enemy. Every minute that passed brought the monster closer to their position. Even now she could feel it, like a presence, looming in the cold, vast emptiness of space. Kalo broke the silence. "We need to prepare for the worst," he said, his voice low but steady. "The creature is coming. There's no more time to wait."